I never thought I'd hear my son laugh while watching me drown. The sound carried across the water as I clawed my way to the surface, my lungs burning my waterlogged navy dress, dragging me down like lead weights. David's laughter mixed with the yacht's engine noise, a cocktail of betrayal that tasted worse than the Atlantic saltwater I was choking on. 30 seconds earlier, I'd been standing on the deck of his 42-foot pleasure craft, admiring the Massachusetts coastline and thinking how thoughtful it was that my son had invited me for a celebration cruise. 6 weeks recovering from hip surgery had left me desperate for any sign that David and his wife Vanessa still wanted me in their lives since Robert died 2 years ago, leaving me with his tech empire fortune. "Mom, we want to toast your recovery." David had said that morning, his voice warm with what I'd mistaken for genuine affection. Just the three of us like a real family. I should have noticed that Vanessa kept filming me with her phone. Not openly, she was too clever for that, but holding it at an angle while pretending to take selfies, capturing footage of me sipping mimosas, discussing my will looking every inch the confused elderly woman they needed me to be. I should have questioned why they kept refilling my champagne glass, why David's casual questions about trust arrangements felt like an interrogation, why Vanessa's smile never reached her eyes. Instead, I'd stood at that railing like a trusting fool wearing my best dress and believing my family loved me. "Say hi to the sharks," Vanessa had whispered, her breath hot against my ear. The push wasn't violent. They were too smart for theatrical brutality. Just a calculated shove when I was off balance admiring the horizon, my hip still aching from surgery. Over I went 72 years old and suddenly fighting for my life, in water so cold it stopped my heart for 3 terrifying seconds. As I broke the surface, gasping and flailing, I heard David's voice carrying across the growing distance. "Mom, oh God, Mom!" But underneath his performance, Vanessa's real conversation cut through the salt air with surgical precision. "Yes, we'll need you to file the emergency petition first thing Monday morning. She's clearly not competent anymore." That's when the pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. The power of attorney documents they'd brought to my hospital bedside, the way my financial advisor had stopped returning calls, the $3 million I'd given them for David's consulting firm that had somehow never materialized into any actual business. They hadn't invited me out here to celebrate my recovery. They'd brought me here to stage my death. The yacht's engine roared to life, white foam churning behind the stern, as they abandoned me in water that felt like liquid nitrogen against my bones. I watched my son speed away, leaving me to drown while he and his wife planned how to spend my inheritance. That's when I saw Captain Jake Morrison's fishing boat on the horizon and realized that sometimes the best family isn't the one you're born into, it's the one that pulls you out of the water when your real family throws you in. The Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly around me, dark and indifferent, but for the first time in months, my mind was crystal clear. I wasn't just fighting to stay afloat. I was fighting to stay alive long enough to destroy them. Jake Morrison's weathered hands hauled me aboard the Molly Sue like I weighed nothing more than a net full of cod. His teenage grandson, Tyler, wrapped me in a blanket that smelled of honest work and diesel fuel so different from the Italian leather and designer perfume that had surrounded me on David's yacht just minutes before. "What kind of people just drive away from someone in the water?" Tyler asked, staring at the horizon where my son's boat had vanished. "The kind who inherit $3 billion if their mother doesn't make it home," I said, tasting salt and betrayal in equal measure. Jake's radio crackled to life. "Coast Guard, this is Molly Sue. We've got a woman we pulled from the water about 12 miles southeast of Gloucester. She's conscious responsive, but needs medical attention." "Wait." I grabbed his arm, my fingers still trembling from the cold. "Please don't let them know you found me, not yet." Jake studied my face with eyes that had spent decades reading weather patterns and water conditions, someone who knew when to trust instincts over protocols. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the gentle slap of waves against the hull. "You in some kind of trouble that's bigger than nearly drowning?" I looked back toward shore, toward the life I'd been living, toward the son who'd just pushed me into the Atlantic, and the daughter-in-law who'd been documenting my supposed mental decline with the methodical precision of someone building a legal case. "The worst kind," I said. "The kind that wears your own last name." Jake keyed his radio again. "Coast Guard, this is Molly Sue. False alarm on that rescue. Turned out to be debris in the water. All clear." As we headed toward a small private dock, I told them everything. About the documents David had brought to my hospital bedside after my surgery. About my financial advisor who'd stopped returning calls. About the $3 million I'd given them for David's consulting firm that had somehow never materialized into any actual business. "So they figured they'd rather be rich orphans than broke kids with a living mother," Jake said when I finished. "Apparently so." I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. "But here's what they don't know about being supposedly dead. It gives you options you never had while you were alive." Tyler dropped us at a tiny dock in a cove I'd never seen before. Jake knew a woman there who ran a small bed and breakfast. Mrs. Chen was exactly the kind of tough-looking 70-year-old who took one look at my bedraggled state and immediately started heating soup without asking a single question. "Honey, I've been running this place for 30 years, she said, ladling chicken broth into a bowl. "I've seen people running from all kinds of things. Long as you're not bringing violence to my door, you're welcome." That evening, while David and Vanessa were presumably filing police reports about their tragically missing mother, I sat in Mrs. Chen's kitchen wearing borrowed clothes and planning their downfall. The local news was already running the story. "Prominent businessman's widow missing after boating accident." The photo they'd used made me look exactly like what they needed: a confused elderly woman holding a drink at what appeared to be a party. I remembered that moment. David's surprise birthday party last year, where I'd arrived expecting a quiet family dinner and found 20 strangers in my former home. In the photo, I just looked lost and bewildered. Perfect for their narrative. "They've been planning this longer than just today," I told Jake as we studied the news coverage on Mrs. Chen's old computer. "Look at this obituary. It's already online. Margaret Harrison, beloved mother, passed away in a tragic boating accident. In lieu of flowers, donations to the Alzheimer's Association. Bastards are already spinning your supposed dementia," Jake muttered. I clicked through more articles, each one painting the same picture of a grieving family dealing with an elderly woman's declining mental state. David was quoted extensively about my recent confusion and memory issues. Vanessa had apparently sobbed to reporters about how worried they'd been about my safety. "There," I said, pointing to a quote buried in the third paragraph. "David's saying I'd been showing signs of cognitive decline for months. That's the foundation of their legal strategy." Mrs. Chen looked up from her knitting. "What kind of legal strategy?" "The kind where they have me declared mentally incompetent posthumously so they can claim I was unable to make sound financial decisions. It protects them if anyone questions the power of attorney documents or the will they probably forged." Jake leaned back in his chair. "So what's your plan?" I stared out Mrs. Chen's kitchen window at the dark ocean that had nearly claimed my life and felt something cold and calculated settling in my chest where maternal love used to live. "I'm going to let them bury me," I said quietly. "Let them file their probate papers and their mental incompetency claims. Let them think they've won. And then Margaret Harrison is going to rise from the dead with a very special gift for her loving family." The funeral was surprisingly well attended for someone who was supposedly dying of dementia. I watched from behind a maintenance shed across the cemetery, using Jake's fishing binoculars to observe the proceedings. David had spared no expense: premium casket, elaborate flower arrangements, professional programs with my photo on the front. What struck me most was how genuinely sad some of the mourners looked. My neighbor Eleanor was crying openly. My book club friends had come clutching tissues and each other. Even Dr. Peterson, who'd handled my hip surgery, was there, looking somber. These people genuinely cared about me and David, and Vanessa were accepting their sympathy while knowing I was alive. "See anything interesting?" Jake whispered, crouching beside me. "Look at who's not there," I said, lowering the binoculars. "My financial advisor, Richard Barnes. My lawyer, Patricia Walsh. My accountant, Michael Torres. Maybe they're busy with estate stuff." "Maybe," Or maybe they can't look people in the eye while they're part of this scheme. After the service, I watched David work the crowd like a politician, shaking hands and accepting condolences with practiced grief. But I noticed how quickly he steered conversations away when anyone asked detailed questions about my final days. That afternoon, I made my first move. Mrs. Chen drove me to a 1-hour photo shop in Gloucester where Jake knew the owner wouldn't ask questions. While my pictures developed, I sat in the back room writing a letter on elegant stationery I'd bought at the drugstore. Dear David and Vanessa, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Mom. P.S. Give my regards to little Robert Sarah. He's beautiful. The postscript was a calculated risk based on intelligence I'd gathered during my week of official death. Jake had been monitoring the marina where David kept his yacht, and he'd noticed something interesting: baby equipment being loaded onto the boat. Car seat strollers, enough supplies for an infant. David and Vanessa had never mentioned having a child. You sure about this? Jake asked as we sealed the envelope. They need to know I'm alive, but not how much I know about their operation. The baby reference will either confirm my suspicions or send them into a panic trying to figure out what else I've discovered. We had the letter delivered by messenger to their lawyer's office at exactly 11:47 a.m., while they were in a meeting to finalize probate paperwork. According to the delivery receipt, all three of them, David, Vanessa, and their lawyer, came running out of the building within minutes. Phase 1 of my resurrection was complete. That evening, I took the next step. I'd spent days studying the blueprints of my former house, the one I'd signed over to David after Robert died, because I thought downsizing would be simpler. I still had my key. David had never thought to ask for it back. The house felt different in the darkness. Not empty, but wrong somehow. New furniture had appeared, expensive pieces that cost more than most people's cars. The kitchen was stocked with fresh food, imported cheese, organic vegetables, not the basics you'd keep in a house you occasionally visited, but the premium items that suggested regular occupancy. But it was Robert's old study where I found what I was really looking for. The desk was covered with documents, and most damning of all, a detailed timeline labeled The Margaret Project. My own name turned into a code word for my elimination. I photographed everything with the disposable camera Jake had given me, my hands shaking with rage as I read through their plans. They'd been working on this for over a year, carefully documenting what they claimed were signs of my mental deterioration. Doctor visits where they'd coached me to seem confused, social situations where they'd set me up to look disoriented. The birthday party photo that made it into the newspaper, they'd deliberately not told me it was a surprise party, then captured my confused reaction. The medication mix-up 3 months ago that landed me in the emergency room, they'd switched my prescription bottles. Every moment of confusion, every instance where I'd seemed off balance or forgetful, had been carefully orchestrated and documented as evidence of dementia. But the most chilling document was a letter from someone signed only as MT. The timeline needs to be accelerated. Margaret's been asking too many questions about the power of attorney documents. If she gets suspicious and goes to a lawyer independently, everything falls apart. Recommend moving to Phase 3 within the next 2 weeks. According to their timeline, Phase 3 was my death. I was photographing the last document when I heard car doors slam outside. Headlights swept across the front windows as voices approached the door. David and Vanessa coming home from their grief performance. I quickly gathered my evidence and headed for the back door, but their conversation stopped me cold. Think the Peterson woman bought it? Vanessa's voice carried through the front hallway. She was crying too hard to think straight. Besides, what's she going to investigate? Mom fell off a boat. It happens. What about the will? How long before we can access everything? Probate opens Monday. MT says we'll have full control of the accounts within 6 weeks. I slipped out the back door and into the garden, my heart pounding. But as I crept along the side of the house toward the street, I heard something that changed everything. A baby crying. There was an infant in my former house. David and Vanessa had never mentioned having a child, which meant this baby was connected to their scheme in ways I was only beginning to understand. The sound of that crying child shifted something fundamental inside me. This wasn't just about my money anymore. There was an innocent life involved, and I was going to find out how and why. Danny Crawford was exactly the kind of private investigator who thrived on cases that made other people nervous. Former Boston PD early retirement after taking down a corruption ring that included his own captain, and the kind of moral flexibility that made him willing to help a supposedly dead woman investigate her own murder conspiracy. "So you want me to follow your son and daughter-in-law, find out about this mysterious baby, and identify their co-conspirator," he summarized after I told my story in his small office above a sandwich shop. "And you're paying me with what? Because according to the newspapers, all your assets are frozen pending probate." I pulled out an envelope of cash, emergency funds Robert had insisted we keep in a safety deposit box that David didn't know about. "Will this cover 2 weeks of surveillance?" Danny flipped through the bills and nodded. "I'll need photos of the targets and any addresses where they might be staying." 3 days later, he had answers that made my blood run cold. "Your son's been busy since you allegedly died," Danny said, spreading photographs across Mrs. Chen's kitchen table. "Multiple meetings with lawyers, 2 visits to the bank, and 3 separate trips to a private medical facility outside Boston." He pointed to a photo of David and Vanessa entering a modern glass building. "Whitmore Reproductive Services. Very exclusive, very expensive, and very discreet. They specialize in surrogacy arrangements for wealthy clients who want to maintain privacy." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. They bought a baby. According to my contact at Whitmore, the arrangements were made 8 months ago, paid for in cash with instructions to have the birth certificate pre-prepared. Mrs. Chen set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "So they planned your death, bought a baby to inherit your fortune, and had someone inside your financial team helping them." "About that," Danny said, pulling out another photograph. "I think I found MT." The photo showed a woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and an expensive briefcase shaking hands with David outside a downtown law office. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. Miranda Torres' partner at Morrison Torres & Associates. They handle estate planning for several prominent Boston families. "Torres," I repeated. "Michael Torres is my accountant." "Are they related?" "Married. And here's where it gets interesting. Miranda Torres has been quietly building a client base of wealthy elderly individuals with strained family relationships. She specializes in what she calls family transition planning." I stared at the photo recognition finally dawning. I met her about 6 months ago at some charity function David dragged me to. She was very interested in my estate planning. I'll bet she was, because Miranda Torres has a very specific business model. She identifies elderly clients with substantial assets and estranged families, then helps the families accelerate their inheritance through what she calls compassionate intervention. "You mean murder," Mrs. Chen said bluntly. "She's running a whole operation." Danny continued spreading out more surveillance photos. "Finds wealthy elderly people with greedy relatives, helps orchestrate evidence of mental decline, provides legal cover for asset transfers, and takes a substantial cut of the inheritance. And if the elderly person refuses to cooperate, they have accidents. Boating mishaps, falls downstairs, medication overdoses. Always tragic, always plausibly accidental, and always financially convenient for the surviving family." I felt sick. This wasn't just about my money, it was about a systematic operation targeting vulnerable seniors. How many people has she killed? That I can prove none. That I suspect at least 12 over the past 5 years. She's very good at covering her tracks. Danny pulled out a legal folder. "But here's our immediate problem. They filed preliminary probate documents yesterday claiming you died intestate without a valid will, which would make them your sole heirs." He opened the folder and pulled out a familiar document, my will, but with text completely different from what I remembered signing. "They replaced it," I whispered. "This leaves everything to David with provisions for any future children he might have, including the baby they just acquired through Whitmore Reproductive Services." Danny confirmed. I walked to Mrs. Chen's window, staring out at the ocean where this nightmare had begun. "There's something else I need to know. What happened to the birth mother, Edie Isan Priest?" Danny's expression grew grim. "Sarah Collins, 17 years old, runaway from Maine. No family, no support system. Miranda Torres found her at a shelter and offered her $50,000 to carry a baby for a loving couple who couldn't have children. Where is she now? According to the medical records, she died from complications during delivery. But I spoke to a nurse at Whitmore who remembers Sarah. Healthy girl, no risk factors, normal pregnancy, right up until the day she gave birth. The implication hung in the air like smoke. They'd killed her too. Tomorrow morning, Danny said, they're meeting with Miranda Torres to finalize the legal transfer of your assets. I sat back down, my mind racing. Where? Torres's office downtown, 10 a.m. I looked at Mrs. Chen, then at Danny, then at the photos spread across the table showing my son shaking hands with a professional killer. Then I guess it's time for Margaret Harrison to rise from the dead. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one Robert had bought me for our 20th anniversary, when David and Vanessa came home from their meeting with Miranda Torres. I'd positioned myself so I'd be the first thing they saw when they walked through the front door of what used to be my house. The look on their faces was worth 6 days in the Atlantic Ocean. "Hello, darlings," I said pleasantly, not getting up. "How was your meeting? I hope you didn't sign anything important while I was away." Vanessa screamed. Actually screamed like she'd seen her worst nightmare come to life, which I suppose she had. David just stood there with his mouth open, still holding his keys, staring at me like I might disappear if he blinked hard enough. "Surprised?" I asked. I have to say the reports of my death were terribly premature, though I did enjoy reading my own obituary. Alzheimer's donations. That was a nice touch. Carol Peterson appeared from the kitchen, carrying the baby I now knew was named Robert Sarah Harrison. She'd been waiting in the back of the house as we'd planned, ready to witness whatever happened next. "Mrs. Harrison asked me to bring the baby out," Carol said nervously. She wanted to meet her grandson properly. Her grandson, Vanessa found her voice, though it came out as a croak. "Carol, this woman she's dead." "Yes, we covered that," I said. "Turns out drowning is harder than it looks, especially when there are good people around to pull you out of the water." David finally managed to speak. "Mom, we thought the Coast Guard searched for debris, not survivors. Funny how that works when no one actually reports a person overboard." I accepted the baby from Carol, settling him comfortably in my arms. "Hello, little Robert Sarah. I'm your real grandmother, not the kind who tries to buy you with blood money. His name isn't Robert Sarah," Vanessa snapped. "His name is whatever we decide to name him because he's our son." "Is he?" I looked down at the baby, who was looking back at me with serious brown eyes. "Tell me, Vanessa, when exactly did you give birth? Because 4 days ago on that yacht, you certainly didn't look like someone who delivered a baby 3 weeks earlier." The silence in the room was deafening. "The birth was private," Vanessa said weakly. "Yes, I'm sure it was. So private that the actual mother died during delivery under mysterious circumstances." I looked up at them both. "Did you know her name was Sarah Collins, 17 years old, from Maine? No family to ask questions when she disappeared." Carol gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "That's impossible," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Oh, darling," I said, standing up slowly while still holding the baby. "You really shouldn't challenge me on what's possible, because I've been very busy this past week." I walked over to the mantelpiece and pulled out a manila folder I'd hidden behind the family photos, none of which included me anymore, I noticed. "Sit down," I said, my voice carrying the authority that had once managed Robert's household staff. "Both of you." They sat looking shell-shocked. "Let me tell you what I've been doing while you've been planning my funeral and dividing up my assets." I spread photographs across the coffee table. David and Vanessa meeting with Miranda Torres. Multiple visits to Whitmore Reproductive Services. Financial documents showing cash payments for the baby. "This is Miranda Torres," I said, pointing to surveillance photos. "She specializes in helping families like you accelerate their inheritances through what she calls compassionate intervention. In plain English, she helps greedy relatives murder elderly people for their money." "That's ridiculous," Vanessa protested, but she was staring at the photos with growing alarm. "Is it because I have documentation of at least 6 other cases where Miranda Torres provided legal cover for families who wanted their elderly relatives dead?" I pulled out another set of documents. Like Mrs. Eleanor Walsh, age 73, who fell down the stairs after her son started adding sedatives to her evening tea. Her son inherited $2 million. David had gone very pale. "Mom, you're scaring yourself with conspiracy theories." Or Mr. Charles Bennett, who died in a single-car accident after his daughter convinced his doctor that his medication needed adjusting. His daughter inherited $4 million. I looked directly at David. "These aren't theories, son. These are murders. And you're part of the same operation." "We never killed anyone," Vanessa said quickly. "Really? What about Sarah Collins? The 17-year-old girl whose baby you bought, the girl who died during delivery under suspicious circumstances?" The room fell silent except for the baby's soft breathing. "That wasn't we didn't know." David started, then stopped. "Didn't know that Miranda Torres was running a black market baby operation using vulnerable teenage girls. Didn't know those girls had a habit of dying during delivery." I pulled out Sarah's death certificate, which Danny had obtained through his contacts. Sarah Collins died from what the medical examiner called unexpected cardiac arrest during delivery. But according to the nurse who was present, Sarah was healthy and showing no signs of distress right up until Miranda Torres personally administered what she claimed was routine medication. "Your investigator?" David asked weakly. "Oh, yes. Did you think I was handling this alone?" I smiled coldly. "I have a private investigator's surveillance photos, financial records, medical documents, and testimony from multiple sources." I walked over to what used to be Robert's desk and pulled out a small digital recorder. "I've also been recording this entire conversation. Every word you've said, every admission you've made, every piece of evidence you've confirmed." "You can't use that in court," Vanessa protested. "Actually, it's evidence. Evidence of conspiracy fraud and accessory to murder." I set the recorder on the coffee table between us. "Evidence that will put both of you in prison for a very long time." David finally found his voice. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "I want my money back. I want this baby properly adopted by a family who will love him and tell him the truth about his birth mother. I want Miranda Torres arrested for the serial killer she is." I looked at both of them. These two people who had shared my home, my table, my family holidays, who had planned my death with casual efficiency. "And I want you both to spend the rest of your lives remembering that you tried to murder your own mother for money." But they chose poorly. Instead of confessing, instead of cooperating, David and Vanessa decided to double down. I discovered this at 6 a.m. the next morning when Danny called with an urgent warning. "They're moving fast," he said. "I've been monitoring their communications. They spent all night on the phone with Miranda Torres and someone else, someone they kept referring to as the cleaner." The cleaner turned out to be a professional killer, flown in from New York, hired to ensure I had another accident this time, one that would leave a body for the authorities to find. But the FBI had been listening too. Danny Crawford wasn't just a private investigator. He was a former federal agent who'd been working undercover to investigate the elder abuse network that Miranda Torres had been running. My case had provided the perfect opportunity to get her to confess on tape. "We've been tracking her for 2 years," Agent Sarah Chan explained as my former house filled with crime scene technicians. But she was too careful. She never directly participated in the murders, always used intermediaries. Until today, I said, when she confessed to multiple murders while planning 2 more on federal recording equipment. The arrests were swift and comprehensive. Miranda Torres was taken down at her law office, caught red-handed with documents proving her systematic murder of elderly clients. David and Vanessa were arrested at my former house, their phones full of incriminating communications about hiring killers. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Torres's operation. 17 conspirators across 6 states, over $200 million stolen from elderly victims, 12 confirmed murders with more suspected. But the most important outcome was baby Robert Sarah. I legally adopted him with the full support of the court and Sarah Collins' extended family who were located in Canada. They were grateful someone was willing to raise Sarah's son and tell him the truth about his brave young mother. His real name is Robert Sarah Harrison, I explained to the family court judge. Robert for his grandfather, Sarah for his birth mother, and Harrison because that's the family that will love him and raise him with the truth about where he came from. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd been following the case, smiled. I think Sarah Collins would be proud of how her story ended. Today, 5 years later, I'm 77 years old, and Robert Sarah is a remarkable little boy who knows exactly who he is and where he came from. He knows his birth mother was a brave teenager who wanted him to have a good life. He knows his adoptive father and stepmother tried to use him in a scheme that cost Sarah her life. And he knows that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones you have to protect yourself from. David and Vanessa are still in prison. 25 years for David, 20 for Vanessa. Miranda Torres got life without parole. They write me letters sometimes trying to explain, asking for forgiveness. I don't write back. Because here's what I learned during my week as a dead woman. Family isn't about blood or obligation or inheritance. It's about showing up when someone needs you, protecting the vulnerable, and choosing love over greed every single day. Robert, Sarah, and I have that kind of family now. The kind where no one gets pushed off boats, no one steals trust funds, and no one has to die for someone else to get rich. It's a much better family than the one I was born into, and definitely better than the one I raised. The ocean that nearly claimed my life taught me something valuable. Sometimes you have to go under completely before you can surface as someone new, someone stronger, someone who can't be moved. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters.